My name's Brandon and this is the very first episode of Nickelodeon Video Game History, a show where I take a look back on all of the video games based on Nickelodeon shows and retrospectively review them. We finally made it here. It took 3 years and a lengthy hiatus, but we finally made it to Nickelodeon Video Game History. Because this is the start of a brand new video game history series, I thought I should lay down some ground rules that I'll be trying to abide by throughout the series. I never did this for my Cartoon Network series, which resulted in confusion over a few things for some viewers and a lot of repeated questions. So, firstly, what is Nickelodeon Video Game History all about? Well, it's essentially a chronological exploration of every Nickelodeon game ever made. Starting with Nickelodeon's first game in the late 80s, each week I'll be reviewing a Nickelodeon game right up until the present, where Nickelodeon games are still being released to this very day. Now, there are some rules that come with this series. The obvious one is that I will only be reviewing games based on Nickelodeon shows. However, this can get confusing, believe it or not. For clarity, I'll only be reviewing games based on shows that Nickelodeon themselves either own or made. Shows that were merely broadcast by Nickelodeon do not qualify. What I mean by this is, the Nicktoons shows qualify, but shows like Digimon or But Ugly Martians don't. Remember, just because a show aired on Nickelodeon doesn't mean it's a Nickelodeon show. There are also lots of strange cases that stem from Nickelodeon buying certain franchises. In particular, this concerns Winx Club, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Garfield. Nickelodeon now owns all three of these properties, but for a significant portion of their lifespan, the rights lay elsewhere. In these cases, I'll only be reviewing the games released while under Nickelodeon ownership. That means much of the TMNT games will be skipped over here and be saved for a separate TMNT video game history series one day. I think it's also important to point out that I'll be reviewing games based on the live action shows too. I know my channel focuses primarily on animated shows, but I have massive nostalgia for a lot of these, and there really aren't that many compared to the games based on Nicktoons. As was the case with Cartoon Network Video Game History, I'll primarily be sticking to reviewing the home console versions of all games in the series. However, if a handheld version is significantly different or extremely notable, I'll be reviewing those versions in the same video as well. Additionally, I won't be reviewing mobile games unless they're a full-fledged and notable game like the Steven Universe RPGs. I'll not be reviewing Flash games, but I do have plans to one day run a series where I do casual Let's Plays of Flash games. Hopefully putting all of this info across in a video will have answered a lot of questions, but if there's anything still lingering, feel free to ask me down in the comments. With the introduction of Nickelodeon video game history out of the way, it's time to actually talk about the very first game. Nickelodeon's history in the video game space kicked off much earlier than Cartoon Network. Nick has been around for significantly longer, and in general seems to have embraced the video game space to a much greater degree than Cartoon Network. Including the upcoming Nickelodeon Kart Racers sequel, there have been about 100 Nickelodeon games released according to my count. This is in comparison to the roughly 60 games in Cartoon Network's back catalogue. Everything began with Double Dare, which initially released on DOS computers and the Commodore 64 in 1988. However, today we're reviewing the NES version, which was ported by Rare and released in 1990. For all I know, Rare may have developed the original version too. Finding concrete info about video games from this time period is hard enough, but it's even harder when you're looking for info that pertains to an obscure game based on a Nickelodeon show. I would say just about everybody watching knows exactly who Rare is. Battletoads, GoldenEye, Diddy Kong Racing, Banjo-Kazooie. These are just some of their iconic games. More recently, they released Sea of Thieves, which is arguably their most successful game since being acquired by Microsoft. Double Dare was published by GameTech, who have been closed since 1998. In their heyday, GameTech really carved out their spot in the industry by releasing games based on game shows. Stuff like Wheel of Fortune, Hollywood Squares, and The Price is Right were all published by GameTech. Now, it might come as a shock to some of my younger viewers that the very first Nickelodeon game is not only based on a live action show, but a game show at that. While recent eras of Nickelodeon have mostly been defined by Nicktoons and Dan Schneider-esque sitcoms, Nickelodeon cut its teeth and built itself on the back of game shows like this. Double Dare ran from 1986 to 1993 and was even revived twice, the last time coming in just the past few years. It's an important part of the Nickelodeon legacy, so to see it represented in video game form isn't too surprising. Another thing that shouldn't be too surprising is that there really aren't any reviews of this game. Archives of reviews for games before the mid-90s aren't great, and considering how old Double Dare is, there's a good chance nobody even reviewed it. Nintendo Power had literally only been running for a couple of years before this game's release, so it wouldn't surprise me if it never got an official review. Having seen playthroughs of video games from this era that were based on game shows, I'm not expecting a whole lot out of Double Dare. but it's an important part of Nick's history, so it's going to be an interesting review at the very least. The live-action game show stuff that Nickelodeon produced never seemed to take off in Australia. As far back as I can remember, Nickelodeon was just cartoons and live-action sitcoms for us, with stuff like Double Dare being completely absent. Because of this, I don't really have any connection to this game, nor do I really understand the show it's based on. I've seen exactly 0 episodes of Double Dare, so I can't personally tell you whether this game is an accurate reflection of the show. According to the Nickelodeon wiki, it bears very little resemblance to the show, but then I looked at its Wikipedia entry, and they claim it plays exactly like its television counterpart, so I don't know. What I do know is that Double Dare is yet another game chock-filled with mini-games, combined with a bunch of trivia. Upon booting up the game, you're asked whether you want to play a 1-player or 2-player game, and then you're greeted by this hideous host that looks more like a horror movie villain than a friendly face for kids. Ugh, I wouldn't trust that dude around my kids. You've also got 3 difficulty levels to choose, which I honestly wasn't expecting here. Naturally, I chose the middle difficulty to start off with, as I always do. Now it's time to pick your avatar for the big show, and there's actually quite a bit of variety. Unfortunately, much like our creepy host, these kids are almost entirely hideous. I decided to choose Cool Dude McGee with his mohawk and sunglasses, because he seemed like the best of a bad bunch. Once you pick your character, you get paired up with another at random, as this is a 2-person per team game. This doesn't really affect how the game plays though. I do really feel sorry for these virtual kids. Not only do they look hideous, but they have to put up with that creep. Blink twice if you're being held against your will, kids. It's time to get down to business. No, not to defeat the Huns, but to play a kids game show. First thing on the agenda is the toss-up challenge. This is a physical challenge that decides who will go first in the trivia challenge. Hope everyone has watched Double Dare before, because there ain't going to be any explaining of rules or structure from our creepy host. The first toss-up challenge I played was bowling. Here you have to set the speed and angle of your throws on a little meter, trying to knock down 3 pins before your opponent. This is extremely basic, and it'll be over in 5 seconds. After that ends in the blink of an eye, you're immediately whisked away to the question round. Take my word for it, it's an awful idea to play this game in 2020, especially if you're not an American. Not only are you being asked questions about pop culture from 30 years ago, but there are also dozens of questions that are very specific to America. The team who won the first challenge gets to answer a question first. If they answer correctly, they keep getting asked questions until they're wrong, or they choose to dare. You see, if you come to one of these questions that basically sounds like gibberish to a person in 2020, you have the option to dare, which doubles the money received for answering the question correctly and passes the question onto the opposing team. Getting a dare question wrong will give the darer money, so there's incentive to double dare if you're not entirely sure of the answer. If a double dare happens and the participants still can't answer, they're able to go to a physical challenge. Unfortunately, in my first question round, it was nothing but questions. Felt like I was back in school doing a pop quiz. Every question was answered, so I was taken into half time. After the short intermission, I went into another toss-up challenge. This time I was playing Hungry Clowns, a game where you're tasked with throwing 3 eggs into a clown's mouth. This minigame is literally identical to bowling. You use the same control scheme and pretty much have the same objective. Just like bowling, this was over in a flash, as the opposing team nailed their first 3 throws and I was left looking like an idiot again. So we were back to answering questions about Tony Danza and other shit that hasn't been relevant in an eternity before I finally got to do a physical challenge. The game I was given to compete in was putty golf. The objective here was to simply putt an egg into a hole to win. However, there's a bit of actual teamwork involved for the first time, as your partner needs to blow the egg into the hole due to the angle of the setup. You've got 20 seconds to do this, which is not nearly enough time to get your bearings and complete the challenge if it's your first time. It functions the same as every other game played so far, but how was I supposed to know that before heading in? Where are the instructions? After I spectacularly failed, it was back to more trivia. This really exposed that I'm not as familiar with 80s pop culture as I thought I was. And then it was all over. The second round of trivia finished and I was the loser. In my first episode of Double Dare, I had played just 3 games compared to the 20 trivia questions I'd answered. Double Dare parades itself as an action-filled game, but really, it's mostly trivia questions. It took roughly 15 minutes to play through an episode, so obviously I was going to play some more. In my second episode, the toss-up challenge to start it off was Gorilla. In this, I needed to toss a banana into the hands of a gorilla by, you guessed it, using the exact same controls as every other game so far. All of these damn minigames are just some variation of the same thing. I was annoyed by this in Mandark's lab, but this is next level. The second minigame I got in this episode was golf. This doesn't have the weird blowing part of the golf physical challenge I had already done, but it did use the exact same controls as every other game so far. After yet another loss in a challenge round, I'd come to the conclusion that the AI was just way too good on normal. I'd started to get the hang of the controls. I mean, how could I not, considering everything is the same? But the AI are too good. They completed basically every challenge I faced them in almost immediately. I couldn't dream of playing this game on hard. Following yet another failure on the set of Double Dare, I decided to boot up another round, but on the easiest difficulty this time. My first minigame was bowling again, and surprise surprise, I managed to finally win something. What I found is that the AI on normal was too good, but the AI on easy was pathetic. I might as well have been playing against nobody most of the time. I was looking for a happy medium, something where I was challenged while still being able to win. Instead, I'd activated baby mode. While doing my easy mode run, I somehow managed to get another physical challenge, and to make things sweeter, the gameplay was different. In Cake Catch, your partner launches cakes into the air and you have to catch at least one by jumping on a trampoline. I was relieved to have something unique to play, but I found that it was way too easy. You just need to catch a cake once and you win, and with the ample time limit given, I can't see how anyone would fail. In the second toss-up challenge of this episode, I got Gorilla again. At this point, I was starting to question whether I had seen everything Double Dare had to offer. If there were other toss-up challenges hiding away, they were being excluded in favour of repeating bowling for the millionth time. The stars aligned in the second half, and I managed to get another physical challenge. Ring toss is pretty similar to Cake Catch. Your goal is to catch 3 rings on your head that are thrown by your partner. Now, every game I've played so far had you controlling just one of the characters, but all of a sudden you find yourself controlling both in this game. Of course, the game doesn't tell you that, so you're left to flail around helplessly for a bit until you finally understand what's going on. Additionally, this minigame is just awkward to control. Trying to line your character up correctly felt like a Herculean task. Despite playing on easy, this game of Double Dare still went down to the wire. I only squeaked out a win because I stole $40 via a dare on the last question, which, now that I look back on it, it makes literally no sense that the opposing team dared me. There's no penalty for getting a question wrong other than the opposing team getting to answer the next question. But because this was the last question, they simply could have answered whatever the hell they wanted to and won the game. Once you win, you actually unlock more gameplay that isn't trivia questions. The grand finale is a big obstacle course, which, in the true spirit of this game, they don't explain to you at all. What I figured out through trial and error was that you need to mash the directional pad back and forth to make your character run and take on whatever obstacles are in your way. Eventually you'll come across flags, which you need to jump up and pull down. Doing so is how you acquire your hard-earned prizes. For my work, I managed to nab a watch and a stereo. And that was my Double Dare experience. As you could probably guess, it wasn't a very positive one. The biggest issue is that there isn't a single instruction or explanation given to you during this game. There's no explanation for how the general game of Double Dare works, nor do they feel like telling you how to play any of the physical games. Literally everything you do in this game is left for you to figure out on your own, unless you've seen the show before. Even if you had seen the show, that knowledge wouldn't explain how to compete in the challenges. Every new challenge you get results in you flailing around helplessly the first time you play it. The game desperately needs to explain things to its players. I probably could have got some enjoyment out of this if they did. I wasn't a big fan of how trivia heavy this game was either. Obviously trivia played a part in the actual show, but I bet if I put up an old episode there would be a lot more physical challenges happening. Instead, the AI refuses to do physical challenges ever. It just won't happen. Which honestly seems kind of insane to me because they crushed it in the challenges. If they did the physical dare stuff, they'd win the money every time. The AI had to be in cahoots with the creepy host, because I swear they always ended up with softball questions while I was asked stuff that was crazy hard in comparison. To top it off, there's no music in the question rounds. Sitting there in silence was just weird. In general, I have a bit of a gripe with the whole format. Technically, if you were incredibly smart and knowledgeable about pop culture from this era, you could gain control of the questions and then just answer everything correctly, not giving your opponents a single chance to win any money. Personally, this seems pretty dumb to me, and I kind of experienced this myself. Playing another round on easy, just to capture some more footage for the review, I pretty much steamrolled through the questions and won by a ridiculous margin. Double Dare is a very rocky way to kick off Nickelodeon video game history. I'm sure many of you are disappointed we're starting off with a live action game show, so it's even worse that this game sucks. I was slightly curious when I saw Rare as the developer, but Double Dare turned out to be one of the cheapest games I've ever played. Almost every minigame is a carbon copy of one another with a slightly different coat of paint. The games aren't fun to play, the barrage of trivia questions is boring, you'll almost never get to do a physical challenge, and the final obstacle course is just painful. The obstacle course is long, and all you're doing is button mashing. My arms ended up cramping from doing this. I refuse to believe any one person can win this final challenge without cheating or having a second player tag in. Overall, I'm massively disappointed in Double Dare. Unless you have massive nostalgia for this title, there's no reason to try it out unless you really want to see what the first Nickelodeon video game was like. Next week I'll be reviewing the very first Nicktoons video game. Ren and Stimpy was Nickelodeon's first massive animated hit, and boy did they milk it. The next 4 reviews are of Ren and Stimpy games on various consoles, with there being 7 games based on the franchise overall. The title I'll be reviewing is Ren and Stimpy Space Cadets on the original Game Boy. To catch that and all my upcoming Nickelodeon reviews, make sure you're subscribed.